to make your rights relative to your culture and situation is relativism. She was not a relativist. She was an objectivist. Those people, she drew these morals, she says, from the...
That's a major flaw of traditional metaphysical approaches, is that they become so abstract that they can't be communicated. They become so esoteric that you have to be initiated into that particular metaphysician's way of being in the world before you can understand what the hell they're talking about. Metaphysics need to be more communal, more democratic.
Why do you call these things metaphysics, Matt? Why do you call them metaphysics? If we're inventing and playing with them and moving them around like that, breaking them down, changing them around, democratically working on them, those are philosophical projects, material philosophical projects. They're no more metaphysical than a community that uses a certain kind of hammer. And you go to Japan, and that community also has a kind of hammer, but it looks, notably different. Does similar kind of work, has similarities, but you'll see different kinds of tools, and they might fill a similar niche and look similar, and you can recognize that it's a certain kind of tools sometimes, but they're unique to that culture. That's how physical things are created, and not metaphysical things. Do you see what I'm saying?
Have to affect people's lives. They can't just be words in a book. So, in a way, this oral format of vocally and interacting with one another and doing philosophy is really significant in terms of what metaphysics needs to become. And because speech, unlike writing, is more enlivened and spontaneous.
See, the closest thing I have to a metaphysics is prior state. So we have this stream of consciousness. I would require a metaphysics for that if I were asserting anything about it. But all I'm asserting is that I have this experience. Okay, that's how I avoid that. And then when I get up to my materialism, I do get an explanation. The explanation is it's the result of biology. That's why it's prior, not because it's metaphysical truth, but because it's simply prior. I evolved and got a brain of a certain kind. It's not metaphysical truth that space is three-dimensional. I have evolved senses which perceive it as three-dimensional, or four maybe, if, according to some, or whatever. Those are the things I get prior. That doesn't make a metaphysics. The world doesn't necessarily have to be metaphysically three dimensions for me to perceive it as three dimensions. Think of a one-celled creature. How does it perceive the world? Probably not as three-dimensional, right? Probably not. It doesn't seem to have sufficient senses to gather that information. That's why it evolved into us, because that was a benefit to certain ones of us. Obviously, we survive well without, so those ones are doing fine with a one-dimensional or a half-dimensional view of the world, of a perceptive metaphysics. Geez, I know people are going to go nuts on that. I don't understand why people want to act like single cells aren't alive, but whatever.
And it is closer to the things themselves as they arise in our experience. When we speak from our experience, instead of about it, which is easier to do when we write because we can reflect before we articulate. When we speak, we're more in the moment, and the forms are more able to manifest and be shared between people.
You're talking about forms just like they're ideas, like they're abstractions, human abstractions. I don't know why you want to call such a thing metaphysics.
The eternal ideas become more like living presences when they're shared immediately through an oral conversation. When it's written, then philosophy becomes an abstract symbolic art.
Video, correct. Okay, well, interesting. I don't know where you were going in the last part of that, per se, because I see this back and forth, if you want to call it metaphysics, But hey, if you just want to call it metaphysics, meaning all the things that have been called metaphysics, fine. But if you're ascribing these characteristics, metaphysical characteristics, a priori characteristics to knowledge, then no, that's not going to fly. All of our abstractions come from the stream of perceptions. And I think that's more and more demonstrable all the time. You can see it in introspection, you can see it looking at other people's behaviors and cognition, and I just at this point I want to make sure you take into account what I'm saying about being and becoming, about everything being a process, about this involving time, and about everything being abstracted from our perceptions, which of course is very compatible with everything being a process, because as I said, processes and perceptions are closely linked. Perceptions are detections of processes. And so anyway, thanks for joining in the conversation. I think you were already in it, but if not, anyway, totally appropriate. Thanks for your contribution, and if you wonder about me picking differences with you when we agree on so much, you can see this video on isms I made to Modern Mystic. It applies to you as well. All right, so cheers.
Be in their language, and maybe their language has different meanings and intonations that things can be lost in translation. So you'd look for the elements.